And thank you for everybody joining tonight. I see a couple Local 7 members on here. So thank you guys for coming in. I'm going to be presenting tonight Podcasting Beyond the Basics and advanced tips and techniques for successful podcasting. So on the agenda for tonight's presentation, we're going to be speaking about branding your podcast, how to improve audio quality, guest management and interviewing, got marketing and growth. We're going to talk about some tools that you can use. We're going to talk about how to target your audience. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of script versus freestyling. We're going to mention interview techniques, and also how to engage your audience, measuring success. And I have a special tool that I want to put out there and share with you guys that you might find interest with. And then we're going to talk about the value of a union podcast, what it can bring to your union and how it can help members. And then the last 5 slides of this presentation are just for you if you want to go over. I put a little bit of information on streaming. Perhaps maybe we can do a webinar about streaming, but that seems to be the new wave that everyone's going to. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into branding your podcast. So when you're thinking about branding your podcast, you want to choose a memorable name that's going to capture people and people can remember. You also want to design a professional art cover. Like generally when I'm going through and I'm looking at podcasts, sometimes I might not even click on it because of how the art cover looks. You want to have an art cover that's inviting. You also want to write compelling descriptions beneath your podcast, what it's about. And you also want to develop a consistent intro and outro. You want like an intro theme, music, things along that nature. And also when we're talking about branding your podcast, you want to define your podcast mission and values, what it is that your podcast is about. Choose a podcast name that reflects your tone and topic, and also develop a recognizable logo and art cover. As I said it before, art cover is kind of big to me, maybe not to everyone else. You also want to select a consistent audio intro and outro theme, again, music, and you also want to align your brand and personality with like the colors you use so that when people see it, they know that that is your podcast. Next, we're going to talk about a consistent branding and promotion strategy. So like I mentioned before, you want to use the same fonts, colors, and tones across your episodes. You want to create brand guidelines to ensure uniformity across the platforms, whether you're, someone's on Apple Music or Spotify, you want it to look the same and have the same brand. You also want to leverage with guest interviews and brand hashtags for discoverability. Like you want to create hashtags for your podcast. People can pull that up right on Facebook. You type in a hashtag and, all your content might show up. You also want to promote through branded quote cards and trailers. A lot of times you see podcasts doing reels right now. That's real popular. You want like a 60-second reel that might draw more viewers to your podcast. You also want to encourage audience engagement. Like some podcasts have people call in, and you also just want to give shout outs to your listeners. Next, we're going to talk about improving audio quality. So you want to invest in a quality microphone. You don't have to go out and spend $1,000 on a microphone, but you want a decent microphone. You also want to use soundproofing techniques, and you want to edit with tools like Audacity or Adobe Audition or Adobe Podcast. Adobe Podcast is my favorite. Adobe Podcast, it can enhance the voice. You want good, crisp audio when you're producing a podcast. And you also want to use noise reduction plugins or kind of like effects that are in Premiere. They have effects that you can put in to also enhance your audio. And you want to optimize equipment and recording environment. So obviously, like I said, invest in a quality microphone. You might want to put a pop filter on to, take away when people are breathing. You want to record in a sound treated or a quiet space. You definitely don't want no echoes in the room, and you want to use perhaps maybe even a boom or an arm or shock mount to avoid vibrations. I don't know if anyone's ever seen some podcasts where people like to talk with their hands and then they're hitting the mic and it's just distracting and it's never a good thing. And you also want to ensure consistent mic distance when people are speaking. I know sometimes some of the podcasts that I've run, people get to talking and they move around, leaning all over the place, and you're not able to pick up that good audio. So you always want to make sure that the microphone is positioned, well enough in a good space from the speaker to be able to hear it. Next, we're going to talk about editing and post-production, which is a big deal. Like I mentioned before, you want to use software like Audacity, Adobe Audition, or even Reaper. You want to normalize and compress audios for a consistent value. Nothing's more annoying than when you're watching something, you got to turn the volume up, you can't hear it, or it's too loud, you got your headphones in, it's blowing your ears out. No one likes that. So you want to normalize that audio. You can use, EQ to enhance clarity and tone, and you want to use limiters to avoid distortion and loud speaks. Next, we'll talk about guest management and interviewing. Before you bring a guest on, you want to research your guest that you're bringing on your show thoroughly. You may even want to send prep materials in advance so your guest is aware of what is actually going to be going on your podcast. You also want to remember to ask open-ended questions. You don't want yes or no's when you're conducting a podcast. You want to ask questions and try to keep the conversation flowing. So when you're preparing for your guests, obviously, like I said, research your guest's background and recent work. You can send them pre-interview questions or a prep sheet in advance. And one of the biggest things before you start your podcast, you always want to test your audio and internet connection beforehand. That's one of the biggest factors is you always want to do a test run before you set up to officially do your podcast. And you also want to clearly communicate the episode structure and also the time commitment. You don't want a guest to come on and they have to leave in the middle of your podcast. That's never a good idea. That's never good. You want to make sure they're able to be there the entire time. You also want to get consent for recording and using them in a video or your podcast when you're distributing it. So when you're hosting, you want to follow up professionally with the guests that you've had, and you also want to create a relaxed and respectful environment during recording. Like I said before, you want to ask open-ended questions and allow natural conversation. You want to actively listen and adapt to the guests' responses, and then you want to thank them on air for coming on to your show and encourage them to share the episode link with social media. And when you're sharing, it wouldn't hurt to actually include them, that they were there. So right now I'm going to jump into marketing and growth, social media promotion, intriguing podcast descriptions, collaborations and shout outs, and even emails and newsletters. Those can help make your podcast grow. So some marketing strategies is you want to define your audience and niche clearly. Create eye-catching podcast cover art. Like I said before, cover art's always been a big deal for me, and episode titles. And you want to make sure your episode descriptions is available to be searched easily. And you want to submit to all major podcast directories like Spotify and Apple. And you also want to cross-promote with other podcasters, and you may even want to appear in some of their shows. That's an opportunity for you to promote yours and get more views. And you want to engage actively on social media. Obviously, like I mentioned before, clips and reels, those are kind of a big thing right now. Everyone loves TikTok. Even myself, I can sit on TikTok for hours just scrolling and seeing all the content that's out there. So, reels are a big thing, and it'll definitely help grow your fan base or your views when it comes to your podcast. And also even hosting some giveaways or having like a Q&A session is also not a bad idea to engage more members and, like I said, get you some more viewers on your podcast. So obviously, some of these you might have heard of. The biggest distribution platforms are like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and obviously YouTube. And just to give you a little bit more insight of what distribution platforms are, is basically a podcast distribution platform allows podcasters to share episodes with a wide audience. These platforms distribute podcast content across various directories, obviously like Spotify, Apple Music, Google, etc. And most of these platforms provide analytics to track audience growth and engagement. Platforms can be free or require a subscription with premium features. And I know nowadays, like everything's pretty much a subscription, and it drives me crazy too. So how does podcast distribution works? So basically, podcasters will upload their audio files to a hosting service. The hosting service generates an RSS feed that includes episode details, metadata, and the audio file. The RSS feed is submitted to podcast directories like Apple Podcasts or Spotify for syndication. Once approved, the podcast episodes are accessible to listeners on these platforms. New episodes automatically update across all platforms as soon as they are uploaded to the hosting service. So having an RSS feed is one of the biggest things that can help your podcast. And some essential tools, again, Audacity, Adobe Audition. Obviously, you want a microphone and or camera. You can use Canva to create your art cover design and your RSS feed. So essential podcast recording and editing tools. Obviously, like you've heard me say several times, Audacity, Adobe Audition. A microphone that is really popular is the Shure SM7B. A lot of podcasters are using that. You obviously want to have some good, decent headphones, and you want filters and shock mounts to reduce the noise and vibrations during recording. And now we're going to talk about some analytic tools. Some podcast hosting platforms like Podbean or Buzzsprout, RSS feed services, as I mentioned before, automatically updates and sync your podcast episodes to Apple Music, etc. And most of these include analytic tools where you can gauge, when did your audience stop watching, when did you get the most viewers. Paying attention to your analytics is one of the biggest and most important things that you can do because it can enhance your podcast and actually show what were we talking about or what was going on at this moment in time that made viewers more interested. And right now I want to ask you guys a question, if you guys can. Is I want you to drop in the chat, what's a podcast that you like. Share it with the members that are here tonight, and I encourage all of you that look at the chat and see what podcast people drop and go check it out for yourself. So let's see. Like for me, I like Joe Rogan. He's pretty good podcaster show. I'm a little bit of an astronomy nerd, so I like Star Talk. That's pretty good podcast that I like. Let's see what we got in here. Okay, crime and sports. Okay, Ben, the skeptic. Okay, and labor radio. Oh, okay. Mason Cameron. Okay, I know that one. Yeah. All right. So, yep, just give you guys a couple podcasts to check out. And moving on, we want to, like I mentioned before, do you want to find how to target your audience? You want to identify your podcast's unique angle. Obviously, we're Union, UAW. You want to research your ideal listener. You want to tailor content to their interests and, what they're going to benefit from. So when it comes to your podcast, you want to identify, what you're an expert in and the topics you're most knowledgeable about. Conduct market research to determine if there's an untapped or under reserved audience. And you want to consider trends and your personal interests that align with audience demand. And you want to keep your niche narrow enough to stand out, but broad enough to attract an audience. And then again, for targeting your audience, you want to think about who's your ideal listener. Maybe consider their age, gender, location, the entrance, occupation. Obviously, we're all UAW and mostly auto workers. You want to leverage social media and audience engagement to refine your target profile. Obviously, you want to use analytics from your podcast to understand your audience, maybe even the demographics. And you want to tailor your podcast tone, content, and format to resonate with your target group. Create listeners' personas to guide your marketing, promotion, and content strategy. Now let's turn to scripting versus freestyling. We're going to talk about the benefits of scripting. How could, with a script, it could be more clear and straight to the point. And the benefits of freestyling, how it can be, provide some authenticity and it could be more spontaneous. Or you might even want to consider a hybrid approach where, you have half of your podcast, is scripted and then the other is just going to be kind of freestyle. So the pros of scripting is it ensures that the podcast stays on topic and is way more organized, provides a clear structure for each episode, helps maintain flow and consistency across episodes, and allows for better time management. It avoids rambling. And some of the cons, though, when it comes to scripting is it can sound overly scripted at some points, almost robotic, if not delivered naturally. It limits creativity and conversation, and it kind of requires more preparation and practice. And like I said, it may hinder authentic, raw conversations with guests. And when it comes to freestyling, some of the pros are, it sounds more authentic and natural, allows for creativity in the moment, and is easier to adapt to unexpected topics or changes, and encourages a relaxed and informal atmosphere. However, some of the cons can be it can result in rambling and lack of focus, may cause repetitive or off-topic content, and it's harder to maintain structure and organization. And then just not having no structure, you're at risk of losing, listener interest due to lack of clear direction. And after you decide whether you want to script or freestyle, some interview techniques you can do are to prepare is prepare thoughtful questions. Like I mentioned before, you want to research guests in advance. Yeah, you want to listen actively and follow up organically, and you want to maintain a conversational tone. So when you're preparing for your podcast interview, obviously you want to research your guests, understand the background, who they are. You want to craft your questions, prepare them to be open-ended. That's very big. You want to know the subject matter that you're talking about, and you want to discuss the format and length of the interview beforehand. Obviously make sure that your guests can be there the entire time. And again, you want to check all equipment, all technical aspects before you even start your podcast. And when you're conducting the interview, you want to listen actively. You don't want to be, lean back in the chair or playing on your phone. You want to be fully engaged. And you want to create a comfortable atmosphere. You want to start light. Don't just dive into, some really deep questions. You want to, let your guests warm up to the podcast. And you want to guide the conversation, be mindful of time, and steer the interview back on track when needed. Sometimes that's a big thing. Some people might get on your podcast and just go way left field, and you got to bring them back to where you need them to be. You want to allow your guests to finish their thoughts. You don't just want to be cutting everyone off, and you want to be adaptable. If the conversation takes an unexpected turn, embrace it for a fresh perspective, but also you don't want to go too far off from what the original topic is. And then to engage your audience, ask for listener feedback, host Q&A episodes, encourage reviews and shares, or maybe even create a Facebook group. And to elaborate more on that, when asking questions, you can encourage audience interaction by posing questions throughout the episode. You can include stories, share personal stories that relate to the topic, making the content more relatable. You can have more, have guests with unique insights to add variety. You just don't want the same person coming on all the time. You want to have different people. And then you just want to use polls or maybe even surveys to collect feedback from your audience. So if you're doing this for your local union, you can send out a poll, to the members and see what they have to say. And you want to engage your listeners through tone, energy, and emotion in your voice. You just don't want to be speaking so monotone the whole time. And then also, you want to build when you build your viewer base or fan base. You want to be consistent. You want to release episodes on a consistent schedule to keep your audience expecting new content. Like you don't just want to fall off. You want to keep providing content for them. You want to use, platforms like social media to foster ongoing discussion and fan interaction. You want to show appreciation, acknowledge your audience by reading listener feedback, reviews, or shout outs during the episodes. You may even want to create exclusive content, offer bonus materials, or like a behind the scenes episode. And you also want to build a personal connection with the members, obviously, because we're talking local podcasts. Want to build a connection with your listeners by sharing your journey, challenges, and successes. And now we're going to talk about measuring success. You want to monitor your downloads and growth trends. You want to track listener retention, use feedback and reviews, and refine based on analytics. So when I speak about download numbers, you want to track the number of downloads and streams to understand your audience reach. You want to see how many people are actually listening, how many people are downloading. You want to track, even if you offer subscriptions, you want to track to see how many subscribers that you actually have. You want to track your engagement. You obviously want to pay attention to your comments, likes, or shares. And you want to review and ratings, like the positive reviews and high ratings on platforms like Apple Podcasts. When you get these high ratings, it's showing you that, your viewers are actually liking the work that you're doing or the content that you're providing. And obviously, when we're talking about analytics, it can talk about demographics, understanding demographic data of your listeners, helps in fine-tuning your content. And then social media mentions is a big one. You want to track how often your podcast is mentioned on social platforms. And next, actually, I'm going to go back so I discovered, before I go to this next slide, this is actually one of the biggest things that I wanted to share with you guys. So obviously Denver went over in the beginning, the first episode of this podcasting series, basic tools and essentials you'll need. He kind of really broke it down. So if you haven't seen that one, I would recommend you go see that. This next tool that I'm going to show you is basically you have your camera set up, you got your switcher, you got your microphones. What if I told you that if you wanted to produce a podcast that you didn't need, camera operators, you don't need to even know how to edit? What if I told you you could just hit record and there's a tool that will jump from different camera angles, cut your podcast for you, and have it all edited out for you, and all you got to do is export it, and your video is ready to be shared and made. So this next little tool that I want to share with you guys is called Mix Effect. And Mix Effect is an iOS app for controlling Blackmagic switchers. It's designed for live video production workflows, and it works on iPhone and iPad and offers advanced control features unavailable in ATM software control, and eliminates the need for computer and mobile or compact setups. So the key features of this Mix Effect app is it's super source control with customizable layouts. You can configure it to however you like. It has an audio mixer control, and it has streaming stats. It offers multi-view, and it has built-in transitions, and it has button grid for fast camera switching. But there's a key feature to where you don't even have to worry about the camera button. Before I go into that, I'm going to talk about some places that this might be useful. Obviously, we're talking about local union podcasting. So even if some church services might use this, and it's also a good idea set up for sports streaming. So I know Ben and Will Yum are on here. How cool would it be if you could perfect this and use it at the kickball game? That would be a cool feature, I would think. So the basic real selling point for this app is the video follows the audio. That's how you're going to get the cameras to switch automatically. What this app does is it allows that when someone's speaking into a microphone, it's automatically going to jump to whatever camera you have on that microphone. So that's going to be your transition automatically done for you. So this feature switches video sources based on audio activity. It's ideal for panel discussions, podcasts, or interviews, and it automatically cuts to the active speaker's camera. So, and it increases production value and reduces manual switching workload. So with this, it's compatible with several different switchers, and you don't have to be connected to Ethernet. It can work over Wi-Fi, and it's seamless integration, and it enables control over audio, video, media, and even DVE features. So why would you want to choose Mix Effect? Because it offers intuitive touch interface and real-time control. It replaces hardware panels and mobile workflows, actively developed with community-driven features, and it's ideal for professionals who want full ATM access on iOS. It saves time, enhances control, and simplifies complex productions. So, for you to get a better understanding of this, if you actually go to YouTube and you search Mix Effect Podcast, there's actually a video where the guy shows you setup, and he shows and actually does the podcast and how the audio switches to each different angle and how you can export it right away. Like, this takes out so much work, and I think that this is really a great app if you want to enhance your podcast. Obviously, we've seen the evolution of podcasting from it just being audio to now it's video, obviously to increase, views. And this would definitely take your podcast to the next level. Now, it will take a little bit more knowledge of once you set up your cameras, you got your HDMI cables running to your switcher and things like that. But check this app out, and if you can grasp it, it will definitely help take your podcast to the next level and take so much work off of you. And now we're going to jump into the strategic value of union podcasting. So podcasting provides unions with a modern, cost-effective medium to communicate consistently. It builds a loyal listener base while delivering long-form messaging. It allows union leaders to stay top of mind with members, especially during critical negotiations or crisis. And it offers a modern communication channel that fits members' mobile lifestyles. A lot of our UAW members, we're working long hours and long shifts. So we need something that's on the go, and to be able to deliver information to someone that needs, the on the go lifestyle, a podcast is a great way to do that. So you can also boost internal engagement and member solidarity. On your podcast, you can think about sharing member stories. And, when you're interviewing members, and you can share workplace victories, you can promote upcoming union meetings, events, and strike votes. With clarity and urgency, you can highlight member contributions and amplify lesser heard voices from diverse roles and departments. You can use podcast analytics to track listener engagement and fine-tune messaging. You can have regular episodes can keep members informed about negotiations, wins, and news. Obviously, again, personal interview with members will foster unity, encourages two-way communication via listener feedback and Q&A segments. And also, having a local union podcast, it can, open up the door for education, training, and contract clarity. You can use your episodes to explain grievance procedures, contract provisions, and rights under labor law. You can supplement traditional training with audio-based tutorials and storytelling. You can provide ongoing orientation for new members or stewards who need context in union history. Podcasts are ideal for sharing information about workers' rights and benefits. Can cover topics like contract interpretation, safety training, and overall it just builds awareness of union history and role in labor movements. And also, a local union podcast encourages community outreach and public messaging. A local union podcast will strengthen union reputation by showcasing local impact, create partnerships. It can counter negative stereotypes that you may experiences that we experience and may challenge. It can expand your reach to potential allies. It can also reach out, if a younger person comes across your podcast, it might bring about people that want to join the UAW or maybe even want to start a union because they've seen your podcast. And then also, a local union podcast, you can use the podcast as a platform to promote pro-labor legislation and call out anti-worker policies. You could bring, lawmakers, organizers, and scholars to talk about topics relevant to labor rights and democracy. You can also use it to rally support for campaigns, union drives, and solidarity actions. And one of the biggest quotes that we have is, the ballot box or the bread box is directly related to the ballot box, so you can also use it for political advocacy. And then you also just want to, as we reflect on everything we just went over, you obviously want to remember, consistency builds trust, the importance of knowing your audience. And, podcasting is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You don't have to have all the latest technology in the beginning. It really doesn't take much. But as long as you're providing communication, the sky's the limit, and you can always go forward. And that's the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you have any questions, here's my email. And I also want to point out, make sure you visit our Luca YouTube channel. Every time we have these webinars, we put them on the Luca YouTube channel. And don't forget to subscribe and share that channel for other members to see. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Roy if there are no other questions.
Okay, Charles. What we're going to do is we'll open it up to Q&A. If anybody has any questions for Charles, please either put them in the chat or, speak out and ask your questions. Let me start it off by asking, I know you stated that sometimes with your podcast, you have the pros and cons of scripting versus freestyle. Which do you prefer?
I prefer that I have a set topic. We all let my guests know what the topic's going to be about. I might have 2 or 3 questions that are in my head that I can jump to and pivot to when I need to. But I like freestyling because I just like more authentic, raw, natural reaction from whoever I'm interviewing.
Fantastic. Anybody else want to ask a question?
If you don't mind, I would like to, Roy. Charles, Brian Martin from Local 163. I'm curious, do you use any type of sound dampening in the room that you're doing your podcast in?
So some of the podcasts that I've done, has been in the studio, so it's kind of already pre-made. But if I'm doing a podcast at my house, I would use some type of sound dampening, put something up to absorb sound and try to get the best audio that's possible and prevent echoing. You definitely don't want echoing.
Thank you.
I guess one of my questions would be, you do interviews and do you do like solo, or do you have a preferred platform kind of to work with?
So your question, do I do one-on-one interviews? Would I prefer one-on-one interviews, or do I like multiple people?
Well, yeah, because I've had an idea of maybe doing like a round table kind of thing, have, like a regional director, maybe some local presidents and stuff like that. And maybe even an advocate or somebody else where we can kind of fire off different stuff. I'm from Local 95, for those of you that don't know me. I'm from the Janesville, Wisconsin area. Yeah.
So my answer to you would be, the more the merrier. The more people you can have on your podcast, the more content and more, viewers you're probably able to get. However, that also comes with more work. Obviously, with podcasting, we have it now to where it's video. So
right.
You really want to have all those microphones and all those camera different angles. It really depends on how much work you want to do. But
Okay.
Ideally, I always say about 3 people is probably a good amount. Most podcasts only have 1 or 2. I shouldn't say 1, has 2, but yeah, I just defer it back to whatever your preference is, how much work you want to do. But you can also just set up a wide angle camera and have all, everyone in the shot and have your audio on those different microphones. But, I think more people is always better.
Okay.
Thank
Charles,
you,
one
Enrique.
more question. I'm sorry. In regards to these software platforms that you're talking about in the hosting services, is the ability to have callers call into your podcast, is that something that is covered under that particular platform?
What I've done is, what I'll have is, it's set up to where I run the audio from my phone. So I haven't used the platform itself, but I just have, we flash a number and the user or viewer can call that number and we'll just patch that audio through. So I haven't used that on a platform yet.
Okay.
Hey, Charles, we have a question put into the chat. Great presentation, Charles, and to everyone. Do you have a room at your hall to record your podcast? For those that do, what kind of work went into putting it together? So go ahead. You want to take this one, Charles?
Yeah. So unfortunately, at my local union that I come out of, Local 7, we didn't have a specific room. What I've done before is, like, for instance, when we're going up to the Luca conference, if you're in the podcasting class with me, we're going to go do a podcast. So what we're going to do is, you're going to find an area that's quiet, that, is blocked off, that you're not going to get no interruptions, and you want to use that area. You don't necessarily have to have a set room. But to answer your question, to try to get a room at your local, you might want to, talk to your local leadership, and see about using a set room that you can have. Obviously, if a location is not possible for you to find and you want to use your local, I don't see no problem with you just asking your local leadership, hey, can we use this room for the day, and create content.
Fantastic. Any other questions?
Yes. Hi, Charles. So the YouTube channel, do you just put in Luca to find the YouTube channel, or is it UAW Luca?
I can pull it up and drop the link in the chat for us.
And can you also drop your email in the chat in case we have questions?
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you.
And again, just as a reminder, as Charles is doing that, for those that, again, are planning on attending and have not yet registered, the registration for the Luca conference itself ends May 30th. Get with your local leadership to have them send you as a delegate. It would be greatly appreciated. And it's fun. It'd be fun to see you there. We got quite a few courses to offer. Again, Charles is doing one on podcasting, and he's doing a podcasting course. And we also have it set up so you have core classes and you have electives. If you can't get into the core class, say, for instance, you want to do videography, you could take Charles as an elective, as far as to get a little bit of podcasting experience there. So again, definitely would like to see most of you. Again, for those that came to the webinar a little bit late, we will be posting it on our Facebook page, and we will have it on our Luca page. Charles will be editing it, which is always fun because he gets to edit himself. So that's going to be great. I'd like to thank Charles. I'm going to ask one more time if anybody has any other questions. If not, we will wrap this up. So last call, any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Charles. Appreciate you taking time out. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We will not be having a webinar in June. We are having a conference. So at that point, hope to see most of you there live and in person. Take care. Have a great night. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.